Welcome, everybody, to Dead Talk Live. And we have a very special guest tonight, director of Brightburn, David Yarovesky. David, thank you for joining us. How you doing?
Good. Sorry, I was just figuring out how to deal with posting the link live. Anyways, how's it going?
It's great. Hey, I got my Brightburn shirt on.
Oh, look at that.
Yeah, I'm ready to go. Talk some. Check this out. I did not know before I watched Brightburn that a whole subgenre of superhero horror existed. Did you know that?
No. What's the no? What? Tell me about this subgenre.
Well, I was reading about it. I didn't know it existed till, I watched Brightburn and I loved the movie. And afterwards, I did some more research on it. And apparently, there is this little small subgenre, which is what Brightburn falls exactly under, called superhero horror. So that brings me to my first question. Uh, did they tell you about the script before you read it, or did they just hand you the script and say, "Check this out"?
Well, okay. Two things. First of all, I do have a question about that because, um, I, even if, well, I'd be curious to know like what prior to Brightburn would be classified as superhero horror. Oh,
I
you
don't
don't know?
know.
Yeah, okay.
I have no
That's
idea.
what I thought you were saying. I thought you were saying, oh yeah, no, I think that, I mean, these are all like sort of marketing buzz points, so I don't put so much stake into it.
Yeah.
But one of the things that Sony would tell us during the marketing is like, this is a new genre. No one's ever done, anything quite like this in films before, and even in comic books, they were, they would often go like dark. You can go dark with superheroes, but incredibly rarely would they explore the genre of horror through the superhero lens, or explore superheroes through the lens of the horror genre, I should say.
Yeah.
Um, so 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 yeah, I mean, that was something that was sort of new and I think distinct about the movie. That was something that I responded to. I mean, when I heard about this script, the way I heard about it was I was at a barbecue with the writers. I was at James Gunn's house. He was having a barbecue. His brother and his cousin are the writers, Mark and Brian, and they were telling me about this script. And at the time, James and I were looking for a movie to make. We'd been looking for a long time. We chased we chased all sorts of projects, and nothing was clicking. Like no one would give us their property to go make.
Hmm.
So we knew we had to go find our own, and we brainstormed writing our own thing, what we were gonna do, and then they told me about the script, and I just kind of knew that was it. And there was a little bit of a journey to get to the place where they were like, yes, let's go. And that's a really not that interesting of a story, but the point is, we all sort of unified around this idea that they had, and strangely enough, so they'd had this script they wrote and that they'd written that was really great, and then James had this weird superhero thing that he pitched to me like a long time ago, and I always poked at him, and I was always like, "Can let's make that together?" And he was like, "No, that's going to be like $100 million." He thought of it as this huge thing, and then this script came through, and it was sort of like all the ideas in that script, all the ideas that sort of James had in his thing, and all the ideas I had in my head, um, you know, uh, around the idea.
Yeah.
And I think we all got into a room and went back to the note cards and started throwing note cards on a board
Gotcha.
and beating out the story.
Now, watching this film, it is very obvious this is not a middle to low budget film. This is a pretty nice budget film. You can correct
Oh,
me,
are you talking about Brightburn or Nightbooks?
Brightburn.
Oh yeah, no, Brightburn is very cheap.
Really?
Oh, it's a very low. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think the financiers spent $6 million on it. I mean, it was like it was very low budget movie. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Oh wow. Okay, that surprised me because so when did the Sony's the distributor of Brightburn?
Yeah, they acquired us in the middle of filming, and I'm not totally sure they knew what the concept was because we were so secretive about the concept of what it was. So no one knew what it was. At the time it was called like Secret James Gunn Elizabeth Banks horror movie, and we were so under wraps. I mean, no one knew. A lot of my closest friends didn't know the plot of what I was shooting because we all kind of dreamed of a day when we could sort of surprise everyone with this
Mm-hmm.
trailer. That the trailer itself is sort of surprising, and I didn't want people to have a year to sort of tear apart the idea or brainstorm like what the movie could be. I wanted to just sort of drop it like a grenade, and we did. It was a ton of fun. But no, we were like that's one of the fun things about Brightburn that people don't really understand is that we had very little money. I mean, very little money, and somehow we came out Memorial Day weekend in 3,000 theaters against Endgame, John Wick 3,
Wow.
King Kong, and Aladdin. And we did not belong there at all, but there we were.
Wow. Now, that answer really blew me away in regards to the budget. And it's also rare for a big studio like Sony, Sony's a major studio, to get involved when production is underway. How did they get involved? I mean, you just said you kept a lot of it a secret. They didn't know what they were getting into. How did they get convinced to buy into this?
All of these answers are kind of above my pay grade. I don't totally know. Honestly, I don't know. I mean, the investors flew in and they were like, "Hey, what do you guys think of Sony?" and from what I understand, I don't know. I don't really know. This is like sort of sausage making. I think they were negotiating an overall deal with Sony, an
Yeah.
output deal, but from what I do know is that just the excitement of what we were working on and being such a big secret, no one could find out anything about it, made it enticing to studio. So I know there were a lot of studios that wanted the movie,
Oh yeah.
and
Well, the
we ended.
concept was brilliant. So you read the script. You know, you knew the writers. Were you there as the script process was being written, or you didn't get to see any of
Wait.
it until it was done?
Oh yeah, no, I think we were all like really involved in me, James, and the two writers were in a room putting scene. We went back to the cards. Just I mean, like if you go to YouTube and watch any like how to write a screenplay, videos, you'll see what we were doing. It's like so we were just sticky notes or cards. We were putting them on an easel, and we were grinding it out and trying to figure it out. There was a big difference between where the script was when I got it and where it was when we started filming. And the big difference was I think that they were I think trying to make more of an indie drama. And
Okay.
and James and I both wanted to push it in more of a big scale, even though we didn't have the money, admittedly. But we wanted to push it in more of like a big scale, like horror movie, like a superhero
Yeah.
horror movie. Kind
Yeah.
of. I think we were both intrigued conceptually about exploring what that is. What would a superhero horror movie be, and sort of pushing on that instead of leaning into the sort of like lighter indie drama stuff.
Gotcha.
And frankly, I do think that Brian and Mark, if they initially felt like they would have gotten even as much money as we did to make it, they probably would have leaned more into that, having more powers and more stuff like that. But I think they wanted to make something whether they had the money or not.
Okay, gotcha. So when you guys were doing those cards, as a director of the film, are you in your mind trying to say, okay, with this limited budget, how am I going to make this work?
Yeah, I mean, I had just made a movie for $500,000. It was the only movie I ever made before. It was this movie called The Hive, and so getting 6 million was like, oh my god, I just won the lottery. So it was in some ways I had to be incredibly creative with how I was really targeted with the usage of VFX with time. Time was the biggest thing.
Yeah.
Um, but I also, spent a lot of time shooting music videos, shooting commercials. I had made this sort of lower budget movie that we were fortunate enough to sell to Legendary and get get out there and have some real success with. So I had a lot of experience in taking, not a ton of money and turning it into something that looked like it did cost a ton of money. And that wasn't just me. It was like, I had a director of photography, Mike D, who I've shot a million things with, who we had this flow
Mm-hmm.
between us, this like telepathic communication, and my wife, who's a costume designer. All of us, we had this crew of people who had been working together for a long time, working on project to project to project, and never had gotten a big budget. We'd never gotten real money to make anything, but we started making things that people thought were big budget or like responded to, like they were responding to big budget stuff. And so we were sort of trained in a way
Yeah.
to be selective in how we used our money.
Innovative, do the most you can with what you got. Now, were you involved with the casting? Most directors usually are. Did
Yeah.
you have complete control over casting?
I mean, no one has complete control over casting ever. I mean, casting is, it's like a chaotic tornado of events. But I read the script the first time. If we're still talking about Brightburn.
Yeah.
I read the script the first time, and I read it and I said, Elizabeth Banks would be great for this. She would be great, and like just as a fan of James's and horror movies, like seeing James and Elizabeth like reunited in a movie would
Mm-hmm.
be really exciting to me. Like I would have killed to have seen that, if I wasn't involved. And so and then I just thought Elizabeth was like in this really awesome place in her career where like I would love to see her in this role. And so I was like, it should be Elizabeth. And then when James got the financing, he called me with the investor. They like went to dinner and talked, had a
Mm-hmm.
conversation, and then he called me on the way home. They were together in the car, and they were like, "Who are you thinking about playing the lead?" And I was like, "Elizabeth Banks," just immediately. And but it didn't seem likely. It didn't seem possible. It got shut down every time I brought it up, not because creatively, but because we were a little movie. Like
Mm-hmm.
people don't realize we were really a little movie. And at the same time, she was like gearing up to shoot Charlie's Angels,
Yes.
and so it just didn't seem like it was possible at all. And I ended up, I just kept pushing. I just kept pushing. I kept saying Elizabeth Banks, Elizabeth Banks, Elizabeth Banks, like just the power of will to force it to happen. And then, I was in my agent's office, and I looked down at a piece of paper and I had a list of names on it. It was like Bryan Cranston, uh, uh, I don't even remember who. It was just like a bunch of like incredible actors on a list,
Yeah.
and I'm like, what's this list? And they're like, oh, this is a list of actors who like are available, like whose project or whatever, like something has happened, and so they're like available and could do something in the next, couple months. And I was like, Elizabeth Banks is on this list, but I thought she's supposed to be shooting, and they're like, I don't know, she's on the list, so I guess she's not shooting right now. And 10 seconds later, I was on the phone with James, like, hey, um, she might be available. We should definitely. And then the next day, I was in her office, and she had
Wow.
read the script, and she loved it, and she was just really excited about it. She's a huge fan of the genre. She's incredibly smart. She is,
She's a
I
great
love.
actress. I mean, she's
I
she's
mean,
just
she's
an
a great actor,
amazing actress. She's an
but she's also a
amazing.
great filmmaker.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so having that to be able to, to have that mode of communication with your lead actor also is so helpful. So helpful.
Now, we hear a lot of times where studios or filmmakers say, man, we need a big name for this to make it work. That's not true for Brightburn. Brightburn, could totally fly on the story itself, and you don't need a big name to make it work. But Elizabeth Banks, you're right, she was the perfect Tory Breyer. Uh, when you were like right away, Elizabeth Banks would be great for this. Did the big name factor into it at all, or did you just think whether she was a big name or not a big name, she was the perfect actress to portray Tori?
Well, I thought about it in two ways. I mean, the one way I thought about it was sort of the first way I described, which was sort of like like the movie conceptually. Like, what is this movie? You know, when you see a trailer, you see, or when you see a poster, it's like you see the actor and you see what it is. Like, I was just very excited about the idea of Elizabeth Banks. So that is to her star power and to her
Yeah.
credit that I thought that that would be incredibly valuable. And at the same time, I I'm just a fan of her as an actress, of her work, and I thought she would bring an incredible performance to the role. Like, she would elevate us all. She would make me look good, really, and the movie look good by being so good in the movie.
She was
And look what she
amazing.
did. Yeah,
She
she's
did.
amazing in it. Yeah.
She's amazing. And so let's walk through some of the scenes in the movie. Now, the beginning where we get a glimpse of what turns out to be this crash, and then it cuts straight into the Brandon growing up videotapes. Okay.
Yes. By the way, I
Uh,
want to say this is going to be really fun because I have not seen the movie since opening night,
wow.
and yeah, and I've made a movie since. So
This is going to be a
you
refresher. This is
it
going to be
will
a
be a refresher.
refresher.
But go on. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. So we see the crash. Well, we assume is a crash in the woods, and then it cuts to the videotape sequence of Brandon growing up. Did you just not want to get, which I think is a great way to do it, instead of having them out exploring what this is, and like Superman when they see Clark Kent and they meet him and he lifts up the pickup truck as a little boy. He's a normal functioning human, apparently human boy up until the age of 12. Was that what you were going for? Not to say that this child, the message you were trying to convey is that this child is no different than any other newborn baby up until the age of 12.
I mean, I think when we went out there to shoot, I had boarded and prepped a pretty elaborate horror sequence for the top of the movie, but we just couldn't afford it. Like, we just couldn't afford it. There was a whole bit where they're driving towards the crash site, and out of nowhere, animals come barreling out of the woods and like scare the shit out of us and crash into like a big animal hits
Yeah.
the side of the car, there was a number of things, and then they sort of discover it, they come upon it, and it was sort of like drawn out and tense and moody, and I thought it was really interesting. But we couldn't, it just wasn't like I would have had to sacrifice some very important things to achieve that. So we couldn't do that sequence.
No, I liked
So
how it was done. I very much liked how it was done.
yeah,
Um,
necessity is the mother of invention, right? So
yeah.
we took it as an opportunity to be like, okay, like, if we're going to tell a superhero origin story, then this moment in it, but through the lens of horror, how does horror deal with backstories like this?
Yeah.
And so I started, I mean, although I've seen all these movies, I often like just throw them on in the background to just start to like process, like, how would a horror movie, like, what's your like default horror movie concept, and then like let's inject the superhero DNA into that,
Hmm.
and that was very much like, let's give us a glimpse, and then let's like revisit later in a dream or in a flashback. We didn't do a flashback, but we did a dream
Yeah.
sequence later where you get like a piece. We got a very very low budget version of the whole sequence that I had planned, in a dream later on,
Yeah.
and sort of, yeah, and that was sort of some of the fun of the movie, is like taking tropes from the horror genre and injecting, put it, and like shining that lens at superhero origin stories and seeing what it does.
Exactly. Now, you can't help but see the similarities with Brightburn to Superman, okay? The whole farm setting where the crash happened, the the husband wife taking the child in, a lot of similarities. Was that done on purpose to really show the anti Superman? If Superman was not this superhero out to save humankind from any and all disasters, but what would happen if Superman was actually evil and bad?
So some like very like astute marketing people told me early on to just avoid saying the S word. Let's just not say the S word. And I don't know when that totally expires, but um, but certainly this is both. You know, Brandon is his own character. He has his own motivations. He has his own. He's not Superman.
No.
But what's fun about the movie, I think, is that we've all been primed by superhero mythology to have expectations. Like, for example, we're all primed by movies to have these expectations. Like, for example, if you have like this really sweet goodbye with someone, as they walk away, in your head you could be like, oh great, now that person's gonna die because because I've seen this happen in movies so many times. And I felt that way about superhero mythology. And so I thought it'd be fun to play like in a subconscious way to constantly tease the audience like hey, you grew up on superhero myths. There's certain things that you're primed to believe when you see a crash landed spaceship and a baby in it on a farm. You think Superman,
Yeah.
but that's fucked up because it's probably evil as hell. It's like you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like you've been led astray by the things that you love and enjoy, and so that's sort of at least the perspective that I brought to this movie.
Yeah.
It was this sort of counterculture concept to sort of, I don't know, take things you find that you've been trained and primed to love and find safety in and invert it.
And you're right. If what happened in Brightburn was to happen in real life, the chances of it being a Superman type person or a Brandon Breyer type person, Brandon Breyer is the more likely scenario, which leads me to my next question. This is obviously not given to us, except in slight hints as he's speaking in tongues in that alien language and converts it to English. I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, the impression that gave me was this imagery of this alien race, that we all have an image of this alien race, like War of the Worlds, Martians coming and a full out battle. But what if an alien race can dominate another planet and species by just sending one of their own as a baby, implanting them into their culture, and when that baby comes of age, he would be so powerful that he can just completely take over that planet.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
I mean, yeah. I wouldn't, like, if I was going to invade an ant colony in my backyard, I wouldn't need an army.
Yeah, yeah,
I could just go do it. And yeah, I mean, I think that. There's, I think we explored, James and I and the writers. There's certainly. I don't want to give anything away because I don't know the future of the franchise, but there's certainly, a lot there. And we like boarded more than we ended up putting in the movie, and we planned and scripted versions of telling more about what you're asking. But you know, all of that starts to open up doors that that were too big for this movie. Not in terms of money, but in terms of like, this very quickly becomes the story about a mother who thinks she's raising, a superhero, but is raising something much worse, and that's what it's about. And so, you know, to get too deep into that would be to lose focus on like the emotional center of the movie, I
Yeah,
guess.
yeah, that totally makes sense. And the movie, absolutely, this, my personal opinion, there has to be a sequel, okay? There has to be a sequel. We see in the closing sequence of the film the news reel of chaos being wreaked on the world. The only person that's really alive that knows what Brandon is capable of, the aunt, correct me if I'm wrong, she's still alive, isn't she?
Yeah.
Yeah, and also the little girl.
Yes.
Okay, so those are the only two people who can say that, this kid is doing all this, but then you're going to have, who's going to believe her, right? This 12-year-old boy is capable of causing all this havoc and devastation. So we'll see. But for me, this is a film, and I don't watch very many where I could say this, where I'm like, there has to be a sequel to this. Now, if you say you don't know if it gets brought to you again. Uh, would you want to continue telling the Brightburn story, or
Of
you want to be
course.
done with it?
No, 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 of course. Like I love that universe, and even more like I love the universe, and I also love all the creative team we assembled around that universe. Like, you know, James James and I are incredibly close. I mean, he officiated my wedding, so like
Wow.
I just feel blessed to be able to work with my friends like Mark and Brian. I'm close with like Simon, one of the producers. He was one of my groomsmen at my wedding. And I know that I'll make movies with Night Books. When I jumped on Night Books, I didn't know anyone in the producer role, and of course, over the course of making the movie, I got very close with everyone. But there's something amazing about just working with people who you just like to hang out with, because when you think about it, and especially our circle of friends, our commitment to the work is so intense. Like we work very hard on these movies, and so it means that all of us are trapped in tiny rooms together for long, long hours trying to solve problems and figure things out and improve the movie in any way that we can find. And so, yeah, I mean, to work with them would be amazing. Obviously, I love this world.
Yeah.
Uh,
Now, what's great is that family atmosphere that you described in doing Brightburn, which was very successful. Were you surprised on how successful the movie turned out to be?
when I heard the release date, I almost like fell over. I was like, "What?" I mean,
Memorial Day weekend is the biggest movie release date.
yeah, and I was like, "What? Why are they putting
Yeah.
what? Like, what do you mean? Like, we're going up against Aladdin? Are you crazy? Like I was just pretty shocked by the whole thing. I mean, but it's funny because the entire movie, it felt very much like we were working on a small indie movie.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I was living in a really not pleasant like hotel for 4 months, and I mean it was just it was as down and dirty as you could make a movie for, really. And then you know as we started heading towards the release, I showed up to the sound mix on the Sony soundstage, and it was like we were in a cathedral. It was like, 100-foot tall ceilings with paintings on it, and there's this massive studio, and there's like food and like a catering cart and all that. And I was like, am I in the right theater? Because this does not feel like I'm working on the same movie all of a sudden.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I guess that they had a concept of the coming success. But listen, to ultimately answer your question, because I get asked all the time, are we, what's the deal with Brightburn? And there's two real things. Number one is that I don't own it, so I don't have any control over if we do another one. Sony owns it. I think Sony owns it. I don't know for sure. But also James is incredibly busy, and there's a whole bunch of people who have to decide to like make the engine go. That's number one, and number two, um, is that we when we planned Brightburn, it was very much like a surprise. We dropped it like a surprise grenade, and I can't promise this because you know the way this system works, but I can say that I would do my very best that if I was ever to be hired onto a Brightburn movie, there wouldn't be press releases. We wouldn't be announcing it. It would be a total secret, and I would deny it until the very moment that I would be showing the trailer. So
Is there a
both
little
of those things are true.
is there a little bit of you that's afraid with the success, if hypothetical sequel of the first one, and now Sony going to be involved? If it is Sony from the beginning, that family atmosphere, working with friends, is just not going to be there for a second one.
Well, I don't know. I try not to. I mean, I imagine it would. I mean, I imagine it would. I think that James would protect us and protect the movie, and not saying that it's like protect us from Sony, but I think that he wouldn't enter into a deal to do another one that we, I don't know, but I truly don't know. That
Yeah.
the real answer is I don't know, but every movie I've made, I've been scared of. I think your fear of the movie is like what drives you to like, you know, like work harder because
Yeah.
this has to work, and you're terrified it won't, and you're terrified of this, and you're terrified of that, and so, yeah, I think if you come at it from that perspective, it's helpful.
Okay. Now,
I think does that say Blake Lewis waving hand? Is that a chat
yeah,
feature
yeah,
there? Oh, that's my friend Blake. Hey,
Blake.
Blake.
So, up until you said your first feature film was The Hive, up until then, you've been doing a lot of shorts. What was it like getting behind the camera and directing a feature film for the first time?
Hard.
Was
It
it
was really hard.
was it
I did
completely different from what you expected it to be?
well. Yeah, it was, but it was a number of things. It was, my ambition was this big. You can't see both my hands, but they're very wide. And then the amount of resources we had to make that ambition was this big. So that's already hard. And then it was my first film. So, when, I'd done 80 music videos or something before this, and I'd done a couple of shorts, but like the most filming I had done back to back was 3 days.
Wow.
So when you go from through, when you do go, so we shot the entire movie in like 17 and a half days. So that's still incredibly fast, but it's a lot more days. So you have to like really, it's just a much longer haul, and it's a bit more of a marathon. So you have to there's a physicality to it. There is a mental exhaustion to it because the amount of prep that goes into that time, and also just I mean, if you're making a movie at that budget, it's really hard
It is.
because you're moving so fast. If you shoot a movie in 17 days, you're moving so fast that I said if I went to the bathroom to poop, I would lose the scene. Like that's it. Like if you have to poop, that scene's done. If you get sick to your like if you get food poisoning, your movie's destroyed. Like so, there's a total physicality to the reality. If I broke my leg, I'd lose 3 scenes and then I'd be slower for the whole time. So it's like there's so many factors. It's such a narrow tightrope to walk. I always say like if you've made a movie for under $1 million and it even makes sense, like kudos, well
Yeah.
done.
Now, you just mentioned all the music videos that you have done, and then you go and, do two very well received movies in The Hive and of course Brightburn. Horror, absolutely horror movies. Is that where your passion lies? Is in horror?
Well, it's where some of my passion lies for sure. I mean, I love horror movies. I grew up on horror movies. When I was a kid, I only wanted to do horror movies, and even before I knew what directing was, I wanted to do special effects like for horror movies.
Oh,
But it's not the only passion I have. But but it is certainly I'm certainly drawn to things that are darker, just in general. And for me, it would it's there's only a couple paths into like making films, and so to me it was like a sort of easy obvious step for me, especially who I am. When you meet me, you're like, that guy will do a horror movie. So I thought it was like an easy step in to make a horror film. But I've never made a straight horror film. Like The Hive is sci-fi horror, and it approaches the horror. It approaches the rules of the horror in a sci-fi way. It sort of explores conceptually. It explores the horror concepts in a sci-fi way, I'd say. And it's also, the inciting incident is a love story. Is two people meeting and so it's not straight horror. And then Brightburn is maybe closer to straight horror, but it's not straight horror because it's exploring a brand, it sort of started a new genre of like superhero horror, whether it did start it or not.
well, superhero horror was very big in comic books, and now it gets brought onto the screen.
Right,
Yeah.
right. That's an even better way to say it. It's like it's really the first time I can think of where someone made a superhero horror movie. And there's been dark superhero movies, but not through the genre of horror, not put in the perspective. Maybe The Crow, you could say, although it is an action revenge movie, there are sequences in which the victims of the victims of his like you're in their POV, and his powers are almost like a ghost, appearing here, he's laughing there. So those are like mini horror sequences, but it's not what we did, and ours is just different,
Just out of curiosity, what would you consider straight up horror? Because nowadays everything is subclassified. Body horror, torture horror. What would give me an example of what you think is just a straight up horror?
I mean, but by the way, I love straight up horror. I think exorcism movies, supernatural movies, ghost stories are straight horror. I think slashers are straight horror to a certain degree. I think Scream is not straight horror, although it is a slasher movie. It's sort of there's a comedy and a mystery element to it.
Yeah.
I think straight horror is really when it's like the goods are horror.
Yeah, nowadays every movie it has to be subclassified some way. It kind of annoys me a little bit. You got your subgenres, the big ones, but man, they're getting very, I don't know, very detailed now with all these subclassifications. So let's move on to.
Agreed, but oftentimes, like for example, The Conjuring, all the subclassifications all exist in the horror genre. It's like a supernatural horror based on a true story, but it's all like it all sort of exists in the horror paradigm.
Exactly.
There's a piece of Brightburn that's sci-fi. There's a piece of it that's like an inverted superhero. So there's something about it that's sort of like, just there's like a punk rock drop to it because it's sort of like anti what's popular. It sort of takes like superheroes couldn't be more popular when we made it. It came out a week after Endgame.
Yeah.
Like the biggest movie of all time, all superheroes came out, and it was sort of being like, okay, you guys love superheroes, but like this is like the gritty, realistic version of if the kid had powers.
Exactly.
And Night Books is definitely not straight horror.
Well, that's what I want to get to next is Night Books. Okay. It's based on a film by the horror novel by J.A. White. What was your initial appeal to the film? How were you pitched the material, and just basically how did it come your way?
Yeah, I mean it. Well, that's a good question. All the time I just like scripts show up in my inbox from my agents, and I read as many as I possibly can. But there are a lot do come in. Um, but this one said produced by Sam Raimi, and it had the Ghost House logo on it, and I said I'm in. I like emailed back immediately, and I was like I'm in. And then I kept reading, and it was like a family film, and I was like, they want me for a family film? That's weird. I just didn't believe I'd booked the movie, because oftentimes you get sent a script, but that doesn't mean you have the movie. It's like, would you like the opportunity to fight for this movie, to pitch on this movie? And then you like pitch, and I was like, they're never gonna actually pick me. Okay, every meeting I took after Brightburn was there was a hint of, hey, we don't want like people's jaws falling off in this movie. So like, is that what you want to do with this movie? And I'd always be like, listen, I made Brightburn. Like, Brightburn called for violence.
Yeah.
The nature of the movie called for violence, and I just did it in a. I just went there with it. I kind of respected what the story needed to be the story that we all signed up for, and so I made that. Um, but I'm not. I don't need to make a violent movie. I mean, obviously, Night Books isn't a violent movie at all. It's for families.
Yeah.
But I knew that going into it, that there was this stigma stuck to me that I had just made, you know, one of the more violent movies that had ever been in a theater, at that scale ever.
So people were cautious as to you not taking them. They want you for a movie, but they want to make it very clear. Don't take it to the level of violence that we saw in Brightburn.
Yeah, but but I never. I mean, I never sort of would have.
Mm-hmm.
We all do this thing to everyone else, that we hate when it's done to ourselves, but we still do it to everyone else, which is that we put people in these tiny little boxes, and we're like, oh, you made Brightburn, now go make 10 more Brightburns, or like, go, like, this is what you make now. And I mean, it's just not who anyone is.
Mm-mm.
It's like we're so much more than the one movie that we made, and
And
and yeah.
actually, a perfect example to that is Sam Raimi. Okay,
Yes.
he does a wide spectrum, and I'm sure he had to work very hard. I mean, this is the guy who did like The Evil Dead, but he's also done Spider Man.
Yes.
So I'm sure because people do like, especially in entertainment, they want to put you in your little box and say you're good at this, and that's what you're going to continue to do. Uh, Being in the industry, do you see it as always a battle to say, hey, I am capable of more than Brightburn movies or this and that? Is it always an uphill battle?
Well, yeah. I mean, listen. I'm really proud of Brightburn. Like, I would never be like I'm capable of more. But I think what you meant is
Different.
yeah, like, are there other types of movies
Mm-hmm.
in me? But like, for me, I wanted to make movies from the time before I could actually hold my dad's VHS camera. He used to have to
Yeah.
help me put it on the tripod, because it was too heavy for me to carry. That's how young I was, and only now am I making movies. It took, it was a 30-year journey from that time to now, that where I'm making movies to prove that I'm worthy of making a type of movie.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I hear that, but also, like, I don't know, the way the thing that calls to me about the thing that calls to me in movies is I don't know, the thing I love about movies. Like, if I read something that sparks some thing in me that feels new, that feels different. It, I always feel like movies are the most exciting when they're opening up doors to creative ways of thinking that are beyond what's just sort of normally there. And I've never really made choices or decisions based on money. Maybe I should have, because then maybe I'd be richer, because I'm not a wealthy dude. But what I did do was I made choices based on like what I wanted to create. Because when I sign up to one of these movies, it takes 2 years of my life. Like
Yeah.
I take 2 years of my life and I throw it in a blender and I push the button, because like my, I don't see my friends. I'm fully consumed. I mean, it's partially, the pandemic has added to that experience, but like, I live, breathe, sleep, eat this movie that I'm going to
You
take
give it
on.
your all.
I give it my all, and then when I get done, like, the memories of it get compressed, and it just feels like lost time. It
Hmm.
just feels like this little black hole in my life where like, here's this timeline, and then bloop, I just like jump over. And during that time I made a movie, and so it's like I feed the most precious resource that exists, like my time, my life
Yeah.
force, into it. And so I want it to be something that I love and feel really passionate for, because it becomes like my child, you know?
I totally understand what you're saying, and not look back and saying, you know what, I just did this and took 2 years out of my life just for money. You
Yeah.
wanna, it's a passion and it's art, and you want to enjoy what you do. With Night Books, you worked with a very strong cast. Any challenges with working with the younger members of that cast?
Well, I mean, there's always challenge. Listen, there's first of all, there's always challenges working with younger people, just based on the amount of hours that you can have with them on set. You have a designated amount of hours, and so there's always a ticking clock over your head. That's number one. And number two, movies where young actors are like take up leading positions, leading roles in the movie, often get defined by the performance of that actor. And so there's a little bit of just pressure on the idea that, like, that good isn't good enough. It's got to be great,
Yeah.
and I don't really like using words like good or great, but it has to be. You really have to be real, and it has to work, and it has to feel natural, and it can't pull you out of the movie. I think would be a more articulate way of saying it.
Yeah.
But I had all the confidence in the world that they would. I mean, when I auditioned them, they killed it. Both of them. Winslow, when I first saw him over Zoom, because that's how casting was,
Hmm.
early pandemic time, and I saw him and I was like, wow, this is the first person out of all the people I've seen who looks like Alex, who I could see being Alex. I
Yeah.
just saw it in him immediately, and then I just crossed my fingers and hoped that he could act. And I mean, he could. Watch the movie, he could.
Yeah.
And he kills it. And so there's so much of the movie that hangs on him, that he needs to. There's just
Oh yeah.
a wide emotional range that and he's in every scene. So there's a lot there. And then Lydia, I mean, I saw her audition, and then I called Netflix and I said, I think this girl's gonna win an Oscar one day, and I just want to be in her bio when she does. We should just cast her. And we did. And then Kristen is, incredible in this movie. She really brings her star power and her charisma to the movie. And it's more than that. Something I said when I was pitching on this movie was that the filmmaker shapes the it becomes part of the movie. I was like, what's Edward Scissorhands without Tim Burton directing it? Like, you
Exactly.
need a weirdo to tell that story. And it was part of my pitch, was that this was authentically me. And I think that there's a piece of this character that's authentically Kristen. She is she's sort of also a weirdo, and definitely was, you know, made fun of in high school like I was for being different and gothy and
Yeah, but
um
look who has the last laugh now, though. Uh,
yeah, yes,
Now,
yes,
was Night Books? So, for our viewers who don't know, Night Books is a Netflix original movie, correct?
yeah, yeah,
Is
yeah,
this your first time working with Netflix?
yes, yeah, it is.
And what did you think? Are they good to work with? They leave you on your own. They don't stand in your way. Let you do the creative process. How would you describe your experience with Netflix?
Well, I think that they were, Netflix has different departments, and this movie was, while on the scale of movies not incredibly expensive, it was incredibly expensive for their department. And so, I would not describe it as they just handed me cash and let me go make my money, but I would describe them as incredibly great partners who who really got behind my vision of the movie, and I was delightfully surprised because there's no scarier moment than, you know, we'd sync up forever, and I would say I'm gonna shoot this like a horror movie. I'm not gonna go too far. I'm gonna, I'm never gonna be violent. I'm never gonna do anything that a family can't see. But it's gonna look like a horror movie. It's going to sound like a horror movie. And they loved that concept. They pushed me. They were like, yes, that's great. But there's no scarier moment than when you're shooting day one, and the dailies, the footage you shot, overnight goes to Los Angeles where they
Yeah.
are, and they watch it. And the first day was we were shooting Alex coming into the apartment, like that first scene when he gets lured in,
Mm-hmm.
by Lost Boys on the TV, and it that certainly does not look like a kids movie.
Mm-mm.
It's stylish and stuff, but it is dark and it is moody and it looks like a horror movie.
And you
And
got a phone call, right?
yes, I got a phone call. They were incredibly happy with how it
Oh,
looked.
I,
And I was just
I,
delightfully surprised. And that was sort of the moment where I exhaled and I was like, okay, when you go to these meetings early on, you all make a deal, right? I express like the movie that I want to make, and they tell me yes, no, we like this, we don't like this. They either hire me or they don't. Um, and to their credit, I made the movie I aim to make, and they deserve a lot of credit because I think there are a lot of studios that would have turned it into something goofy, and I find the movie to be very,
it's
you
great.
know grounded,
Yeah, yeah, it's a great
and
movie. Uh,
thank you.
how about your experience? We're running out of time. With Sam Raimi, what was your experience with Raimi? Is he very hands on, hands off, gets out of your way as well?
He's awesome.
That's
He's awesome.
I've heard that from everybody that's worked with him. He's
He is
amazing.
awesome.
Yeah,
He finds that perfect center line where, like, I mean, I would Zoom with him often. I did not meet him in person though until the sound mix. I also didn't meet anyone at Netflix until the sound mix because I booked this movie in quarantine. The first time I left my house in like 6 months was to go to LAX to get on a plane to fly to Toronto to go make the movie. Like I was this was early quarantine, so I didn't meet any of the Netflix people until recently. And I didn't meet Sam in person until recently, but I really enjoyed my time talking to him on Zoom. We talked often. He was always available to me. I reached out to him a couple times with like, "Hey, I need a little help with this piece," or I always thought of him as fresh eyes. I
yeah.
can go to him and be like, it's crazy to say this sentence out loud, but hey, Sam. hey, hey, Mr. Raimi. I've cut the scene and I feel kind of good about it, but I want you to see it to tell me what you think. And he was always incredibly gracious. He 100% got what I was trying to do, and really got behind it and was a champion of it, and also brought a lot of ideas to like make it better. So he was
Yeah.
just great. I mean, if you have a chance to work with them, work with them. That's what I'd say.
Absolutely. And just to touch back on that Netflix thing, I have relationships with a lot of studios. And Netflix, they're just really good and they know what they're doing. Uh, they're giving me a guest. Like today, they're like, hey, do you want this guest tomorrow, at 12:30 p.m.? And I have an interview scheduled for tomorrow night at 9:30. I'm like, yeah, absolutely. I will take this guest at 12:30 p.m. I'll do two interviews in a day. I have no problem with that. They're a great company from, like I said, working with them and partnering with them. So looking back, what, what project is holds a very special place in your heart that you've done so far?
Oh my God. Well, each one of them, they're all children to me. I mean, I haven't yet had that experience where I hate a movie I've worked on, or they all are really special to me. I mean, and actually the producers of each, now that I think about it, the producers of each one of these movies, I feel very close to,
That's important. Yeah,
yeah, it is. And on the Hive, I knew one of the producers going into it, but all the other producers I didn't know. And but you get really close with these people because it's you versus the world.
yeah,
When you're like, how are we gonna pull off this shot with the resources we have, with the time we have, and then all the curveballs being thrown, and it's just you guys are just your backs are against the wall, and you're just fighting the hordes.
absolutely. Oh
And
man, David, we are out of time, but
all
I
right,
feel we could go on talking for several more hours. This has been awesome. Thank you so much
been great.
for sharing this with us. I love talking about this stuff with you. I could just see the passion that you have, not just for horror, but just for your craft,
Yeah,
filmmaking, and you're great. Brightburn. I love Brightburn. I
thanks,
really
man.
do. I'm a big Brightburn fan. Thank you so much for being here, sharing with us. Any final thoughts before we go?
No, thanks for having me. I guess if you liked watching me, there's more stuff at my Instagram account. You can follow me. It's just my name, David Yarovesky,
Yep.
on Instagram. And check out Nightbooks. It's out now on Netflix. Go check it out.
Check
If,
it
if
out. You
if
guys,
you watch this show, this movie was made for you. I promise. I think you will
exactly.
like it.
Yeah, yeah, it is a great movie. Check it out. It is available on Netflix. I want to thank David again. Thank you guys for tuning in. On behalf of David and myself, stay safe and always stay walking. Good night now.